Hello and welcome to the Immaterial Podcast, where we explore the front page and the footnotes to discuss accounting, the law, white-collar crime, and everything in between. I'm your host, Chris Ekimoff, and today we're back with a Record of Consultation episode, sharing the experience, background, and perspective of an esteemed practitioner in the enforcement, accounting, or legal space. Today, we're excited not only to just have a real practitioner out there in the world, but a true academic who sits at the intersection of law and accounting, and has a couple of special notches in his belt as an academic and as a practitioner, because almost no one out there in the ivory tower changes rules at the SEC, and then they don't also go on from that ivory tower and help build the surveillance system in a brand new trading platform and market. Professor Dan Taylor joins us today, and he has actually done both and is still working on that surveillance system while that first rule that he's helped create is being argued about. So a little bit on Professor Taylor. He's at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, the Arthur Andersen Chaired Professor of Accounting and Director of the Wharton Forensic Analytics Lab. His research focuses on accounting fraud, insider trading, corporate disclosures, and the detection of financial misconduct. He is everywhere in this space. You can read a lot of his published papers in some of the leading journals out there in accounting and the law. Professor Taylor, we're so happy to have you join us here on the Immaterial Podcast.
Happy to be here.
So I want to talk a little bit about your background. Obviously, it's been a long career, an illustrious one, but share with us kind of what first struck you about kind of the forensic accounting and the insider trading issues that you're so well known for today. Was that, you were a toddler just thinking about, with your abacus, how markets were moving and how people could interact with them? Where did that journey start for you?
I don't want to go all the way back to,
to the abacus days.
To my undergrad at University of Delaware. But I will say that my journey as an academic started out very similar to how other academics start out, which is you enter the PhD program. You're doing 5 years of research and teaching assistance. You have limited to no practical experience. And you're reading the academic literature, the papers published in top journals, many of your listeners will never even heard of. Mm-hmm. And you're trying to come up with new ideas. And you're in this environment, which is what's known as publisher parish. So you just got to publish in academic journals. And it's unfortunate, but that's where you get the nickname of the ivory tower, because the people who inhabit that space tend to view themselves above practice, and there's not really this interface, at least in academic accounting, between practice and teaching. And so I would say the year that I was coming up for tenure, I had written this paper called Political Connections and the Informativeness of Insider Trades. And so we analyzed Form 4, so those are the forms that are put out on the SEC's website on Edgar that have all the trades of the officers and directors. And we had constructed a social network map of all of the boards of the various banks and their relation to the Federal Reserve and to Treasury. And this was during the last financial crisis, so like the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. And we observed some pretty stunning patterns in the trading of officers and directors based on their work history and their connections to the Fed and Treasury. The paper found that they were front-running their applications to TARP, front-running when the news was breaking that they were getting bailouts. Footnote here is that there was a relaxation of SEC rules during this period. You didn't have to 8K that you applied for TARP funds or that you got a bailout, because then people were like, oh my gosh, they got a bank bailout. There's going to be a run.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so in 2010, one of the, I guess they were AUSAs. We used to call them ADAs. Mm-hmm. District Attorney from Southern District of New York gives me a ring and says, hey, Professor Taylor, saw this paper that you posted, really interested in that data, would like to talk to you about it. And I was untenured.
Out of the blue, yeah.
Dream, absolutely. Please help make my work relevant.
Yeah.
I'm teaching right now, so how about we do it, at the end of the month? And they said, well, coincidentally, I have so-and-so on the line from the FBI and so-and-so from an agency called SIGTARP, which was the Special Inspector General Office of TARP. And they tell me, coincidentally, we're going to be in Philadelphia and we're going to be at your on unrelated matters. So we're going to see you at your office at 9 a.m. tomorrow.
Strangely, we're in town.
Yeah,
so
coincidentally.
so wild.
And so that that's the beginning of the rabbit hole that took me down where an enforcement path where I realized just how low tech the government agencies, the SEC, the DOJ, the FBI were at detecting and analyzing trading patterns, white collar crime. And I also realized that there was a clear venue now for my research to have an impact on practice, and that was in the enforcement space. So I took my research agenda, which people hadn't heard of before, and I just went whoop, and I went straight down the enforcement path. And you're now seeing 10 years hence, I guess 6 years hence of that. As you mentioned, we changed Rule 10b5-1 based on one of my research papers. There's a bill behind me, if you're watching this on YouTube, that was signed by Donald Trump holding foreign insiders. It's the only bill that an academic's been involved in that's changed the Securities Act of 1934, I want to say. So, we've had a tremendous impact. And now working on, consulting matters, both government matters and private client matters. And as you mentioned in the bio, now on the surveillance committee of Kalshi, helping them build, the next generation of surveillance for their trading platform.
And we'll jump into a lot of that as we go forward here. But I want to pause here because I think, Professor, obviously you're both humble and recognizing your contributions. Talking about that first paper, right, when you were up for tenure, it's a relatively arcane technical idea of how these high-level directors and officers at financial institutions across the country are interacting to movements at the Fed, right? I think we all understand what the Fed is and what it does, but how would information from here or there make me feel differently, A or B? Obviously, TARP and 2007-8 is a whole nother ball of wax. I think the value there not only is just in the analysis, but in distilling down what then becomes a very simple explanation of that certain individuals may have information that the rest of the market is not privy to because of relationships or opportunity or timing or, God forbid, taken from a place that they shouldn't or betraying a fiduciary duty with that information and enriching themselves or avoiding losses, right, is another way to think about it. So that to me is probably where I think of your superpower, Professor Taylor, is taking that wildly, who here on YouTube, raise your hand if you can, has read a Form 4 front to back, right? Probably not a ton of people out there, but being able to take those kind of relevant and public data and tell that story from that technical side, that the relationship side, down to something that everyone can kind of understand is really where I think that value is.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, I always tell my students, if you can't explain it to, your parents,
right,
then you don't actually know enough. You're not actually an expert on the topic.
We joke about that. My wife is a CPA too, so most of the time we can't explain it to each other, but still we need to go one level beyond to figure that out. So I want to spend a few minutes quickly on just that 10b5-1 idea for those listeners and viewers out there who aren't familiar with the process, what the intent of a 10b5-1 plan was, what your research found, and then kind of the implications of where we're at today.
Sure. So officers and directors of major corporations get compensated in stock. So they get these giant chunks of stock that they're given from time to time, every quarter, every year, and they may need to sell the stock to buy a house, to pay for their son or daughter's tuition at Wharton, to do whatever they
or any other esteemed university, but you may have a favorite, yeah.
And they want to sell the stock, but they don't want to get sued for insider trading if they don't actually have non-public information. So we need to give them a way to actually signal to the marketplace, hey, I don't have anything special. I don't have any, secret sauce, secret information. I'm not trying to insider trade. I just need to get some diversity and sell. So the SEC created something called a Rule 10b5-1 plan. So a Rule 10b5-1 plan, the idea of it is that you enter an agreement with a broker like a JP Morgan or a Morgan Stanley, and you say, here's 1 million shares that I'm going to put inside the agreement, and I want you to sell this 1 million shares slowly over time, either same amount every day, or when the shares hit a certain price trigger, sell it, or sell it every day, conditional on the price being above X. And that idea then was that piece of paper, that agreement, would then govern the sale of your equity. So then you could say, hey, wait a minute, like this came up during COVID, the Moderna CEO selling tens of thousands of shares of Moderna stock while the vaccine is being tested. And he was saying, whoa, nothing to see here. It's all in a 10b5-1 plan. And what was happening in Moderna is that now all of a sudden they're relevant. Nobody had heard of them before. Their stock price is going up. And that's triggering his stock sales. So stock price is at 50, sells 100. 55, sells 200. 60, sells 1,000. All the way up to 150, sells all $1 million. And people were seeing increasing stock sales as the price was going up, and they assumed that he was doing something nefarious. When in fact, he had set price triggers 6 months or a year in advance. That's how a 10b5-1 plan is supposed to operate.
Right. It's really a defense mechanism against an allegation of insider trading. It's I knew I was going to owe my Wharton tuition a year from now. So regardless of whether the stock is at 100 or 50 or whatever, I know that I want to sell as much as I can to get the money I need for that, right?
Correct.
And then so a year in the past, you're putting that forward.
That's right. And so the 10b5-1 plan was given a privileged status in enforcement. It was called an affirmative defense.
Exactly.
So you would say to the SEC would come knock on your door and they would say, hey, you look like some sketchy trades. And you would say, haha, nothing to see here, 10b5-1 plan. And then the SEC would turn tail and walk away. And one of the former heads of the white collar section in major frauds in DOJ, so DOJ fraud unit has a market integrity and major fraud unit. The former head, I think his name was Robert Zink, famous for spoofing. He is actually on record saying in a speech that, like, hey, if we get an insider trading case and it's a 10b5-1 plan, that's dispositive. Like that defeats criminal intent. Because why would you set up a plan if you were trying to engage an insider? But here's the issue, and this is where I love blending academics with practice. If you tell people that the 10b5-1 plan is literally a get-out-of-jail-free card, who do you think's going to set up a 10b5-1 plan? Right? Like that's what we call an equilibrium. If you give it privileged status to defeat insider trading charges, the people who actually want to defeat insider trading charges because they're afraid of them are going to start using it.
Yep.
So there were no disclosure requirements on 10b5-1 plans. You don't have to disclose them to the public. You didn't have to disclose to shareholders that you were even using a plan. You didn't have to disclose anything. But it turns out that there were these paper Form 144s, and I'm trying to cut the story short because it's a long story.
It's a good one, but I know where you're going.
That were being submitted to the SEC on paper.
In the mail.
On paper, like 300,000 of them mailed into the SEC, not posted on Edgar.
Yeah, right.
Held in the reading room of the SEC. Now, if you've been to the SEC, I used to joke it's like the basement of the SEC. It's not really the basement of the SEC, but you do have to go downstairs to get to the reading room, and it's kind of like tucked in the corner because no one really goes to the reading room. So there's 300 of these paper filed forms written in pen. Like I have Bob Iger's signature. Bob Iger of Disney, who has plenty of compliance resources, is manually filling these forms out and signing them. And we scanned and we digitized them. And on those Form 144s, it had plan adoption dates. So now we have, for the first time, because it wasn't required disclosure, a set of data on these 10b5-1 plans when they're being adopted and when they're selling these shares. Once it's digitized, we run it through our cutting-edge analytics, and we start looking at, wait a minute, the plan's adopted on Monday, and the plan just sold all of its shares on Monday. The plan is adopted on Monday, and it sells all of its shares on Tuesday. That's not what these plans are supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's not that Wharton tuition in the future. That's tomorrow.
All the time.
That's a CYA for today's trade.
But there was no actual requirement.
Right.
So we give people a get-out-of-jail-free card. We tell people what the intent of these plans are, but we don't actually give them any prescriptive requirements on how they have to use the plans. So they were abusing it. It turned out that there were plenty of cases where people had adopted plans and sold stock on the same day, much like a limit order. I go into Schwab, I want to sell stock in IBM today. I say, hey, if share of IBM goes below $50, sell. That was basically what people were using the plan for, just placing single single limit orders. So we found instances of plans where there was no gap between when the plan was adopted and when the trade was occurred. We found instances where there was a plan was adopted and then it only executes a single giant stock dump, not selling slowly over time. We wrote it up. We looked at loss avoidance. So, like, surprise, the people who sell immediately are selling to avoid losses. The people who sell large amounts under 10b5-1 plans in a single trade, so we call those single trade plans, also were avoiding losses. And we saw that statistically. And it just jumps off the page. You don't have to do fancy regressions or t-statistics. It's just there in charts. And so it was at a moment where there was a bipartisan opening to change 10b5-1 plans. The SEC had seen so many, SEC enforcement had seen so many 10b5-1 plans. At the time, Jay Clayton was the chair. Mm-hmm. He went before Congress and he said, before we even published our research, hey, we should think about 10b5-1 reform and maybe put in a cooling off period between when you adopt the plan and when the first trade can occur.
Starting that delay, yeah.
And this is a Republican SEC chair. And so, of course, the Democrats seize on this, Warren and Van Hollen, to start pounding the drums. Hey, we need this. And then we contributed data and evidence. And that was really the match that lit the gasoline, because it was like people had suspected that they were being abused, but no one had actually crunched the numbers. And so then that got picked up by then Chair Gensler's SEC, Commissioner Crenshaw, and I actually wrote an op-ed in Bloomberg calling for changes to 10b5-1 rules. And so the SEC promulgated new rules a couple of years ago that says, hey, if you're going to use a 10b5-1 plan and you want to get out of jail free card, you have to put in what's called a cooling off period between when the plan's adopted, when it sells shares. You can't have these single trade plans where it just dumps everything on one day. You have to disclose the adoption date of the plan. You have to put in the 10K and the 10Q, whether the plan was terminated, a description of the plan. You still don't have to disclose the plan, just give a description. And you have to disclose the insider trading policies that govern the trading of your officers and directors. And that was, I would say, a big success. They also made those paper forms. No one likes paper forms. They're now on Edgar. So if you ever go on Edgar and you download a form 144, think of me, because it means I failed to negotiate a royalty. Like if I had 5 pennies for every time somebody downloaded.
They're going to have your profile as like a watermark on every
correct,
digitized form 144
on Edgar. But those forms are there because of the work that we did. And that kind of sort of put me on the map and started generating some calls and some business. And then one thing led to another. And then, that promotes me further down that enforcement path.
And so I think that's a great way to kind of summarize, again, kind of another touch point in recent history. Now, the average investor, the average listener or viewer out there is not a 10b5-1 specialist, right? And probably has never heard of that or would care to. But it was, again, a marker in time that showed how insiders should consider defending or thinking about their interactions with the stock market, right? Again, buying and selling shares of the company that they had duties or ownership of or leadership positions in. And then kind of what you saw, and I won't say widespread, but a significant number of abuses of that information, as well as one of my favorite, from our talks over the past few years, is the avoidance of those 10b5-1 plans, right? There was no requirement to follow through with your plan. If I said I'm going to sell 1,000 shares when it drops below 50, and then maybe it dropped to 49, but I knew because of my role as a manager that was actually going to shoot up to 150 when a new drug was announced or a new merger was coming in the next week or two. I might just quietly cancel my sell order because
we have seen that, and you can see it now in the data where you have a plan to sell, let's say at 60, and you learn that you're going to get a buyout offer or an M&A deal
exactly
at 80, and you're like, okay, I want to cancel the plan.
I don't want to sell those shares now. I want $20 more. Right. So
the good news is that those cancellations are disclosed, in the 10Qs. They are not disclosed on 8Ks. So when I tested or spoke in front of the SEC and was, pushing them, I actually said you need to disclose those within 2 days if there's a cancellation.
Right.
Or whatnot.
Yeah.
And they disagreed, and sort of the interest in bipartisan consensus is they said, well, we won't We'll give you everything else, but we're not going to give you that.
Perfection's the enemy of progress in certain
and
terms.
On that point, I will just say there were only two that I'm aware of, complete 5-0 bipartisan votes under Chair Gensler. And both of them were those paper forms and the Rule 10b5-1 plans.
You got to have that a sign up behind you about that too, kind of the 5-0 votes somewhere.
No one likes insider trading.
That's pretty straightforward. Well, a great setup, Professor Taylor. So the stock market, again, well trod here. The Securities Acts of 33 and 34, insider trading, all the things that folks read about in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times on a regular basis. But the conversation has been dominated in recent months, I'll say years. God knows, we're recording this on a Tuesday. If this episode comes out tomorrow, it might already be out of date when it comes to talking about prediction markets. Everyone has probably heard of a prediction market. You've probably seen an advertisement for it. I think, I'm blanking on the actor's name now.
Timothy Chalamet.
Yeah, Timothy Chalamet. Thank you. Timothy Chalamet is getting his teeth done and shouting prediction market words on there. You, as you alluded to earlier, have an advisory position with one of the prediction markets. So before we get into the nuts and bolts about surveillance, what is a prediction market? What are we talking about here, Professor?
So a prediction market is where they trade something called an event contract. And an event contract is a binary contract, pays off at $1 if an event occurs, and $0 if the event does not occur. And so now the question is, okay, I get that, it's binary 0-1. What's the event? And it turns out everything is an event. And that's kind of what, the prediction markets are advertising. This is now you can basically, trade contracts on anything. Who's going to win the Oscars? Mm-hmm. Whether Congress is going to pass a law banning their own trading.
Right.
I should disclose I'm on the no side of that contract. Whether we're going to have a peace deal with Iran at the end of the month, like all kinds of different outcomes. Political contracts. So is Donald Trump going to get elected, or Kamala Harris? Who's going to win the Democratic primaries? Who's going to win the Republican primaries? Military action, all kinds of different events that you can now go on to these prediction markets and trade these binary contracts. Because they're binary. So here's one thing because they're binary, the price of the contract reflects the probability of the outcome.
Exactly.
So right now, I think yesterday, the price of is the U.S. Congress going to forbid itself from engaging in trading in stocks? The no contract was at 92 cents. So that means the market believes that there is a 92% probability that Congress will not self-regulate its own trading. So if you think, oh, no, those guys, they're never going to regulate their own trading. It should be, 98. Great. There's your opportunity. Go on and buy it at 92 and then sell it when it gets to 98. No, if you are an optimist and you think, no, Congress, they're not dysfunctional. They're going to do the right thing, and they're going to follow the majority of Americans who want them to, prohibit trading by Congress members, then you got a bargain right now, because you can buy a yes contract for 8 cents. So you get the idea.
Yeah, and my question I always come back to, maybe cynically, but also with a little bit of adoption bias here, is what is the purpose of this market? I go back to, if you watch the very popular documentary about the Chicago Bulls that came out at the beginning of COVID that we all watched, and how they would bet on whose ice cube would melt fastest on the grill, right? And they were all kind of in this posture around that. It sounds to me a little bit like just kind of these one-off type of exchanges of information about who believes, right, that Congress is going to pass something or not. What purpose is this market really serving in terms of predictions?
So I think that you have to go back to the early days of prediction markets. So before Kalshi, there was an entity called Predictit, and before Predictit, there was an entity called InTrade that was run out of Ireland. It wasn't based in the U.S. CFTC didn't allow prediction markets.
Right.
And you did have, we're not going to talk about this too much on this, but you had a separation between, say, event contracts written over sport outcomes, like is John McEnroe going to win this particular tennis match? That's how old prediction markets are. versus, I'm trying to think who, John McCain going to become, president and
Yep.
beat Barack Obama. There's even, if you go back further, there were prediction markets on Gore versus Bush. And so putting the sports aside, because that is, I think, more entertainment based, although some people think it's, call it hedging, whatnot. We're not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Talking about the politics side, I do think that there is a societal value from having a probability assigned, because right now our only judge is the polls, and the polls are often way off. So it would be nice if there was a way to actually aggregate information and for people to compete, to express their views in the marketplace, to de-bias. If you are biased and you think, say, that Donald Trump is going to run for a third term and is going to win, you can put money on that. And there'll be people out there that think that's insane, and they'll take the opposite side of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a way of expressing sort of unbiased opinions. Because if there's any bias, you're going to get driven out of the market. You're going to lose your shirt, basically.
Yeah, that kind of voter example, too, is famous because people will answer the pollster call and say one thing and then go vote another. When you're actually putting your 92 cents down, you're indicating your belief. You're putting your money where your mouth is, right? You're competing, like you said, in that market about your probabilistic prediction on how this is going to go. And that allows for maybe, I know a lot of the services out there describe themselves as information gathering, information machines to help people understand. And they see, we can talk at length about kind of the run up to certain military actions or trading of these event contracts before events and how wildly they might swing, as the Knicks win 2 or 3 games in the finals, if they're going to win more. Now the price will change, but you'll see the lopsided events change there as well.
I should have also caveated, all of my views are not those of Kalshi or Wharton.
Yes, right. Professor Taylor speaking, maybe not even Professor Taylor, just
all my own views.
Just Dan, that's right. And so we've talked a little bit about what prediction markets are. You obviously sit in a very interesting intersection point between this developing market. I think it's still fair to say we're still learning how it's going to operate and what purpose it'll serve, and that famous two-letter word or 2-word phrase, insider trading. Right. I think one of the biggest headlines around prediction markets has been individuals with opportunistic information utilizing these services to purchase event contracts in a direction of which you talked about, right? It's not just the belief that Congress will pass a law or not. It's the knowledge that it's happening. Someone's maybe pen hasn't hit the page yet, or the event is tomorrow, but you know about the plan today. Right, we're in a whole new world here. So we don't have to get into defining what insider trading is in a prediction market, but I would like to hear a little bit about how you view, I think, your role as an advisor is in that surveillance space. What kind of things are prediction markets doing to surveil and understand what information's out there and the potential abuse of that?
So let's take a step back and sort of talk a little bit about insider trading and going from equity markets to prediction markets, because there are some key distinctions. So I think in equity markets, people think of, and your audience is probably at least our age, maybe a little bit younger, maybe a little bit older.
Who
Wall
knows?
Street and Gordon Gekko.
Right.
And Blue
Greed is
Horse
good.
loves Anacott Steel.
Yeah.
Where it's somebody's tipping off M&A in equity markets, and then that person goes and buys stock. Right. The scale of insider trading in equity markets is enormous. I mean, absolutely enormous. And you see surveillance systems set up to detect out of the money options or large volume right before M&A. And it always hits the front page, right? So there was a lot of mysterious trading volume before AbbVie announced that it was going to take over Cerevel. Huge amounts, all kinds of Reuters and Bloomberg articles written about that. People looked into it. And there's a lot of money to be made there. But Wall Street is Wall Street's not for everybody. My 2 daughters could care less about Wall Street. And so what prediction markets have done is they have, in some sense, democratized the information that you can potentially trade on. So if you think that Timothée Chalamet is going to win the Best Actor award at the Oscars, you can buy an event contract on that. If you think it's going to be Michael B. Jordan, you can buy an event contract on that. If you think, Tim is going to win the Survivor finale, you can get an event contract on that. And so that has really democratized trading to people who have no trading expertise whatsoever. It's not sportsbook. It's not people gambling on sports. So it's not like your sport enthusiast using DraftKings. It's not your Wall Street bro stock trader using Robinhood or even, the Bloomberg terminal. It's someone in the middle who has exposure to neither, but now has, what's this limit order book thing? I have to buy the limit order to
Right.
buy Timothée Chalamet to win the Best Actor award. And then when things don't go their way, it's like, that doesn't sound fair. Hey, there was this big price spike. You're like, what's up with that? Oh, people knew that Bad Bunny was going to be performing at the Super Bowl before he performed. Aha, insider trading. And so as an educator who teaches insider trading, researches insider trading, consults insider trading, I don't want to say I love it, but it's an opportunity to talk about insider trading to people who before did not care about insider trading.
Yep.
My 15-year-old daughter is now talking to me about insider trading because she was watching the Super Bowl performance, Bad Bunny's Super Bowl performance, and she was seeing what was happening and reading the news about how, was Cardi B a performer or not?
Right. What was the definition? Yeah.
Correct. Mark Wahlberg, he attended the Super Bowl, didn't attend the Super Bowl, but people thought he would. So it makes it real now for people who didn't have any exposure to markets. And it increases the width of the markets that you can now trade on your expertise. Like if you have expertise about judging who's going to be the best actor, or judging who's going to be the next president, or judging the congressional bill, is the Clarity Act going to get a vote when we come back from the September recess? If you have expertise about determining those things, you can now make money based on that expertise, whereas you could not before. And so that's pop culture. That's caused a lot of people to start trading on prediction markets. That's also increased the amount of events that people could potentially insider trade on. But I think what people don't, outside of the legal sphere, the enforcement sphere, what they don't realize is that insider trading as a legal concept is about misappropriating or stealing information from a source, violating a duty, and then using it for personal gain. It's not about, sitting outside of the Super Bowl, timing the practices for how long it takes to say the Pledge of Allegiance or the national anthem.
Right, yeah. And then
purchasing
an event contract on that.
Correct. Yeah. Or camping out outside Mark Wahlberg's house and then seeing him leave for the airport to go to the Super Bowl.
Again, we are not proponents of doing any of these things in terms of harassing
if you're
celebrities.
Not violating a duty, if you're collecting public information, that's not insider trading. So a great example is the Nobel Prize Committee posted on their website who was going to win the Nobel Peace Prize, before they put out the press release. But they did it like minutes before. And so if you look at the prediction market price spikes for the winner minutes before it's announced. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's insider trading. And colloquially, I think people understand insider trading as like, oh, they got some information, they traded on it. But from a legal concept, because they put it on the public website, it's not insider trading because that information was in the public domain. So one way to view prediction markets is to generate the most accurate price signal based on public information. And that's still valuable. There's lots of public information out there that hasn't necessarily been aggregated into prices.
And, I think you come from a school, and many of us do, in kind of the open hand of the market, right? More information is generally better, right? So if we can tap into the public sentiment, their observations, their knowledge, their expertise, as you talked about, it's going to create a more efficient, a better identified price for that event contract today, based on more inputs and more observations there.
And everything has a limit, right? So, and that's really what's being tested now in the courts. What's the limit of that? Like, do we really need more accurate information about the number of minutes that the national anthem is going to take? Do we need more information about who's going to win the election? Do we need more information about the outcome of a drug trial? Do we need more information about, who's going to win the NBA finals? Right now, there hasn't been, other than, let's say, contracts based on death or contracts based on national disasters, the CFTC, who's in charge of regulating event contracts, hasn't really placed a limit on their range, and it's being debated. It's society now in the courts whether there should be limits and what those limits would be. And I don't have opinions about that. I think that's a question for society and for our elected officials. What kind of society do we want to be?
Right. I want to get into a little bit of that enforcement level, and there's a few different examples of things we can talk about that have come out in the news related to prediction markets. One more well-known story is that an individual who participated in a military operation on behalf of the United States purchased event contracts with the knowledge that military operation was going to happen, right? Some may call that insider information. Others, like you said, may just be more observant in the market for that. Another example I love to talk about from the Bloomberg News Money Stuff podcast with Ben Levine and Katie Greifeld is about how individuals were betting on the recorded temperature at the Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris and were using a hairdryer on the thermometer to make the recorded temperature go up or down so that they could bet appropriately, right? I think in case one, we have knowledge of the event is going to happen. In case two, we have manipulation of the event happening. And so I think that's all, kind of good framework to talk about what can we do? What should we do? What do prediction markets think about when it comes to dealing with those types of scenarios?
I think they think of all of the above.
Because to your point, right? I think you mentioned the CFTC's hasn't really limited that type of activity at the enforcement level. So it falls to the exchange to consider how they'll treat those types of scenarios.
I think that's right. And I will toot a little horn for Kalshi. Kalshi has 3 layers of enforcement. Kalshi will enforce directly. So Kalshi has brought its own insider trading actions against users, independent of the CFTC and the DOJ. In addition to Kalshi, there's also CFTC bringing enforcement actions, most recently against George Santos for trading on Kalshi. And then there's also the DOJ who can throw you in jail. So in the stock market, the exchanges, NYSE, NASDAQ, basically punt enforcement to the SEC and the DOJ.
Yep.
So like NYSE doesn't knock at your door and say, hey, we think you were insider trading on NYSE. We're no longer letting you trade. Charles Schwab doesn't do that either. It's to the SEC and to the DOJ. So if our government regulators don't have resources or for whatever reason don't care about insider trading or fraud anymore, you're not going to see any enforcement. Kalshi is doing its own enforcement independent from the government. What do we care about? I think broadly speaking, what does society care about? Everything that you just said. Trading on inside information, not public information, but information that you violate a duty, you violate a confidentiality agreement. Market manipulation. You mentioned the hair dryer example. That would be market manipulation. Wash trading. All of the usual, let's say, stuff that you would see in stock markets that you'd want to surveil for you have to also surveil for in prediction markets. What I think is different about prediction markets is how the markets are being used by society. You see a feedback loop that you don't see for the stock markets. So it's not like people are like, oh, wow, the price of IBM is up today. That's going to change how I'm going to vote. But in prediction markets, you see journalists and media outlets reporting odds or probabilities of who's going to win a particular election, and that can change real voter behavior. The issue is that those journalists, when they report it, they don't say, well, it's only $10,000 that traded in the market. Like, it's one thing if $100,000 or hundreds of millions of dollars have traded in the who's going to be president. It's entirely another thing if you look at, well, how much is traded in, who's going to win the local Delaware Senate race.
Right. Yep.
So there is
5 event contracts bought at different prices that doesn't really give you that kind of bandwidth of data that you need to determine that from a statistical perspective, Professor.
That's right.
Although directionally you might be there. I guess one of the other things I think about too, and you hear about in some of the stories in the news, relates to user identification, right? And that's where it's pretty straightforward to follow those stories about the military action and understand the individual was part of that action. What types of steps are prediction markets taking for user identification, knowledge of trading and where their role in society might be, how they might manipulate that? Who's on the other side of username 123?
So I think there's two. That's a great question. I think there's two important things for your audience and listeners to understand. There are really two main leading prediction markets right now. There's Kalshi and there's Polymarket. Kalshi is regulated by the CFTC. It's onshore in the US. Polymarket is offshore. It is not regulated by the CFTC. It is a decentralized crypto exchange. So you can't trade US dollars on Polymarket. You got to convert to crypto. Kalshi is US dollars. It's in the US financial system, ACHs, bank accounts, all that stuff. Kalshi collects what's known as KYC, know your customer documents. So I got to give my social security number, my address, just like I would if I was signing up for Robinhood or Charles Schwab account. They also now voluntarily, no one made them do this, it was recommended by their market surveillance committee that they collect employer. When you sign up for a brokerage account, you have to give employer information. Why? Because that's going to be really critical in any investigation for insider trading. Oh, wait a minute, the Tesla employees trading in something with a number of, cars that Tesla's going to deliver this month. Kalshi, based on the employer information, can just ban them from that market. So they can't even trade. And then if they do trade, can quickly, investigate them. Polymarket, because it's crypto and it's offshore, no KYC, no username. They have usernames, no address, no name, just an email and a crypto wallet. So if you see trading on Polymarket, like the case of the Master Sergeant Gannon Van Dyke, who traded on the knowledge, he helped plan it, the operation to extract Maduro from Venezuela. You don't see when the FBI, the DOJ knocks on Polymarket's door, says, hey, give us this. They say, well, here's the wallet and here's the email.
Yeah, here's a string of hashes to get.
They have to follow the breadcrumbs in crypto to trace the crypto. They traced it back to Coinbase, and then they can go to Coinbase and they can knock on Coinbase's door and say, hey, Coinbase, you're US regulated, who is wallet, blah, 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 and then Coinbase gives them the information. Polymarket doesn't, because it's not US regulated. So one of the key differences between the two is that Kalshi knows who's doing the actual trading and collects more detailed information about its customers relative to Polymarket. And now that's going back to the concept of equilibrium, that's what we call a separating equilibrium. Different clientele at Kalshi, different clientele at Polymarket.
I know we don't have to put a value judgment on it. It's a different set of data, right? To know Professor Dan Taylor is making a event contract purchase on Kalshi may be different than Professor Dan Taylor making an event contract purchase on Polymarket, just because of the nature of how that's presented. We're wrapping up here close to the end of our time, Professor. I hate to lean so hard into a pun, but what do you predict for our prediction markets in the next few years? I think, I like to think of it as a corollary or maybe an analog to crypto, and that there were so many tokens and so much widespread activity that now seem to be narrowing into certain functions. Is that a fair kind of generalization for prediction markets? Where do you see its value in a couple of years going forward, mainly in the election space? Go ahead.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to narrow. I think it's going to widen before it narrows. Mm-hmm. I think there are some pretty key... I think right now the industry is kind of like cautiously move ahead, but there are some really key pending court decisions in the prediction market space in terms of are event contracts on sports outcomes considered gambling, in which case either they have to be outside of a prediction market or the prediction market has to apply for a gambling license. So I think there are going to be some key court decisions. I think it will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And once those decisions have been rendered, I think that will provide clarity. And then you'll see an explosion within the industry, because then people will know what the parameters are.
There'll be those guardrails in so that when you're putting your money towards one of these event contracts, you have a better understanding of how that's going to.
Correct. And you'll know whether that contract can even be offered. Just to be the reason that we have prediction markets right now is because the CFTC decided to allow them when there was a change in administration. for decades, they weren't allowed in the US. And so my concern is in the absence of a court decision, it's just going to ping pong between administrations. Right now, the CFTC has one person, even though I believe it's normally a 5-member CFTC. Mike Selig is going to come out. There's going to be a new administration in. Are they just going to swing the pendulum back the other way and say, oh, sorry, prediction markets,
no
we
more
don't like
contracts,
you.
yeah.
Right. And so I think that once the courts weigh in, that will set the law, and then there'll be an explosion. Robinhood says it's setting up its own. Crypto.com is setting up its own. DraftKings is setting up its own. And so I think you're going to see an explosion of markets, just like you saw an explosion of crypto exchanges. And then maybe, I hope, 10 years from now, there'll be like a consolidation period, and, it'll be mature and there'll be more safeguards in place.
And the most ironic and maybe, disheartening part of all this is you can buy an event contract on every one of those decisions going forward, whether the Supreme Court will rule in a certain way on this, whether that bill will be passed, kind of that self-fulfilling prophecy here. Definitely, Professor, thank you so much for your time today. This is a space that is constantly changing, as we talked about. It may be different tomorrow as this episode airs. So we look forward to following this space. We'll be sure to provide links and updates in the show notes about where folks can find you. Any last thoughts on prediction markets before we go today?
I think we're just getting warmed up. I think probably 5 to 10 years from now, there's going to be a dozen different prediction markets.
Good. Well, yeah. we'll have you back on to discuss the value, the surveillance, and all the activity there. Professor Dan Taylor at Wharton, thank you so much.
Thank you.
As always, we promise that although the Immaterial Podcast isn't authoritative, it will always be authentic. We'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.